if you ever start looking up how to shoot cinematic B-roll, one of the first things that's going to pop up is going to be slow motion. But how do we shoot slow motion? And then once we've got it, how do we use it and or edit it? Now, some people have a fancy camera that has a slow motion setting built in, and if you're one of those people, good for you. But for the rest of us, there's a few technical things we've got to get set up to really make this work. The first thing you want to do is you want to set your camera to whatever the highest frame rate it is capable of. For all of our cameras here in the comm department at Longwood, that's going to be 60 FPS. Once you've upped your frame rate, the next step is upping your shutter speed. Now, we're going to try and follow the double shutter rule as much as possible, which means that our shutter speed needs to be at least 1/120th of a second. Remember, your shutter speed needs to be double that of your frame rate. The problem here becomes when you're shooting in indoor locations or low light, you're gonna have to bring some extra light with you because upping that shutter speed to get that low motion blur is gonna be kind of a challenge. Not insurmountable though. Once you've got all of your technical stuff sort of set, I mean, everything else is pretty much the same as normal. You're still just recording as you would normally record. It's just at a higher frame rate. It is important to remember, though, that when you're recording slow motion, the emphasis should be on motion. If there's no movement, there's not really a point because no one's going to be able to see what's happening. Slow motion is also a good time to practice your freehand movements because there's a lot of stuff we're going to do in the edit that is going to be a little more forgiving than normal. That being said, caveat, the smoother, the more stable your original footage is, the easier your life is going to be. So, I mean, the tripod is still your friend, okay? Just know that you can start practicing freehand stuff here. It's also important to think about the fact that you don't have to use slow motion for every shot. I mean, it's that old phrase, right? If everyone's special, no one is. Like, if everything is slow motion, nothing is slow motion. So we're going to use it, you want to use it sparingly or to add emphasis when you're actually shooting and editing. That being said, if you've been out shooting a B-roll sequence and you've used my favorite method, the method that I most proselytize, the 5-shot method, how do we go ahead and edit those 5 shots in a B-roll sequence? Well, let's jump into Premiere and I'll show you. So once we're in Premiere, we're going to create a base sequence to work from. So that's File, New, Sequence. You can use whatever profile you like. I like using the ARRI profile because it makes me feel like I'm editing movies. I'm going to go into 1080p because it's HD footage, and I'm going to select ARRI 1080p 30 because 30 is half the frame rate that our footage was shot at, and it needs to be slower than what we actually shot. So I'm going to call this base. I'm going to click OK. That moves the timeline here, and we see our timeline sequence show up over here. Now, if you look here, you can see I've already got a bin that I've imported my 5 shots into, and this is just pretty standard footage. Like if we look at this, it's just, you know, some footage of me practicing the motions and trying to get it down, right? If we come back into our main project here, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new bin, and we're going to call this conformed. You can call it something else if you want to, but this is just how I track it in my brain. Then we're going to come back into our 5 shots. We're going to select all of these by hitting Command or Control A, and then we're going to copy them, Command or Control C, depending on whether you're using a Mac or a Windows machine. We'll come back into our conformed bin here. We'll drop all of these copies in here, and the next thing we're going to do is we're going to slow these clips down to 30 frames a second. And how we do that is we right-click on them. While they're selected, we come to Modify, Interpret Footage, and then this menu is going to open up. Once this menu is open, you can see that by default, Use Frame Rate from File is selected. We're going to use the radial button here that says Assume this frame rate, and we're going to change this from 1 FPS to 30. And like I said, what that's going to do is it's going to double all of these clips in length automatically. Now, if I come to the same clip we were looking at a second ago, and I start in the same spot, you can see it's not incredibly slow, but it is definitely slower than it was before, and we're going to do some more things to really sort of work this out. So, now what we need to do is we need to start putting some clips on the timeline, and I'm just going to go through and select some stuff here and put it out there. I'll speed this up for you, but we're just going to put some clips on the timeline. Alright, so now that I've got all my clips on the timeline here, I've just kind of picked my favorite spots out of these, and what we're going to do now is we're going to zoom in on our timeline so we can really see what's going on. Now, you'll notice that when I was dropping these clips on, I didn't bring the audio over, right? I was just dragging the video. The reason I was only bringing the video over is because when you slow stuff down like this, it inherently distorts the sound. There's just not a lot you can do about it. So now if we play this back, there's no effects or anything. We've just got a little sequence here. We've got all 5 of our shots. We've got our creative shot. We've got our close-up of hands, and then after this, we've got our close-up of the face, and we've got our over-the-shoulder, and we've got our wide shot, right? Nothing super special about this, it's just we've got all 5 shots, they're all a little slowed down, but they're not quite as, let's say, cinematic as we would like them to be. So the next step here is once you've slowed things down as we have, is what you want to start doing is you want to start adding in some speed ramping. This adds in that dynamic effect, right? Remember, if everything's slow motion, nothing is. So what we're going to do is we're going to bounce back and forth between full speed, partial speed, slow motion, all of that. So how you do that is, first of all, you expand your video layer a little bit so you can see it. And then I'm going to right click on this clip's effects badge, and I'm going to come down here to time, remapping, and speed. And what that's going to do is it's going to create this little line right here, and if we come into our effect controls, we can see that now we have an effect, time remapping, and it's automatically set to keyframe. So I think when we start here, I'm going to actually have this clip playing at, let's take it up to 200%, because that is full speed of what it would have been originally. Remember, we slowed this down by half. So we're at 200%. And you can see that drop this clip down, right? So this is what it looked like originally. And so I'm going to let him get about 2.5 steps in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a keyframe. Now, I'm going to drop this back down to, I'm going to go down to like 65% here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to ease this by sliding these 2 little sliders. And that's going to make this a transition as opposed to a hard cut. And so if we look at this now, what we have is, comes in, boom. We slow down. And then I think right about as he walks up, right as he's about to drop the bag, we're going to add in another keyframe, and we're going to pull this back up to, not all the way up, we're going to go to like 112%. Again, we're going to ease this a little, not too much. Let's see what that looks like. So he walks in, slows down. I'm going to move this part, this keyframe, back a little bit. We're going to see what we can do here. There we go. Let's see. Yeah, I like that. Go ahead and butt our next clip up. And what I'm going to do here is the same thing. It's just we're gonna speed up and slow down throughout these, and you kind of got to feel it out for the rhythm. It's never going to be exactly the same for every person, but if we right-click on our effects badge, you've got time remapping, speed, and let's see here. What are we going to do? I think I want this to start right where it's at, and I just want this to get slower. So as he starts to pull, we're going to go ahead and add the keyframe here. We're going to drop this down to like 65%, and we're going to, not that one. We're going to zoom in a little bit here. We're going to take this and we're going to drag it over just a little bit so that we have a little bit of a ramp there. Let's see what that looks like. I'm okay with that. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and get the rest of these set, and then we'll come back in a second. So now we've got a little bit of playing around here. Now I haven't gone crazy. Like I said, this is just a demo on how to actually kind of start to add these effects in. But we do have this little sequence here. Now, there's no transitions or anything, but there is one more thing we can do to this to make it feel a little more smooth, a little more fluid. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to right-click on, actually I'm going to select all of these clips, and then I'm going to right-click on them, and then I'm going to come down here to Time Interpolation, and I'm going to hit Optical Flow, and this is just going to help smooth all of the sort of frames that have been stretched. We're going to do that. I'm going to go ahead and render this, so sequence, render in, out. So once this is rendered, you can play it through and you can kind of see what's going on. And before we move on to transitions and all of that, there is one more final step that we're going to add to this to really make it as smooth as possible. And what that is we're going to add a warp stabilizer to this footage. Now, you can't add a warp stabilizer to clips that you've added time modifiers to, so what you're going to have to do is nest them. So I'm going to go ahead and right click here, and I'm going to click nest. I'm going to call this creative, because that's what it is. I'm going to come over here, I'm going to nest this, and I'm going to call it hands. We're going to nest this one, which should be face. Then we're going to come here, and we're going to nest this, and we're going to call it OTS. And then we're going to nest this, and we're going to call it wide shot. Now, you don't have to use these names, but when you're nesting sequences, you should always name them, because if you don't, you're going to have a bad day. Alright, so the next thing we want to do is we want to come over here to our effects bin, and we want to find Warp Stabilizer. Now, we're just going to go ahead and drag that out onto each of these. And it's going to think about that for a minute, and once it's done, we'll render this and we'll move on from there. Now that that has rendered, let's go ahead and take a look at how smooth this is. Once you've got that done, throw in some music and some nat sound, and you've just done a slow-mo B-roll sequence. Keep shooting, friends.